Section 40 of The Art of Public Speaking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Paul Adams. The Art of Public Speaking by Dale Carnegie and Joseph Berg Esenwein. Section 40. Appendix D. Speeches for Study and Practice. Alton B. Parker, The Call to Democrats. From a speech opening the National Democratic Convention at Baltimore, Maryland, June 1912. It is not the wild and cruel methods of revolution and violence that are needed to correct the abuses incident to our government as to all things human. Neither material nor moral progress lies that way. We have made our government and our complicated institutions by appeals to reason, seeking to educate all our people that day after day, year after year, century after century, they may see more clearly, act more justly, become more and more attached to the fundamental ideas that underlie our society. If we are to preserve undiminished the heritage bequeathed us, and add to it those accretions without which society would perish, we shall need all the powers that the school, the church, the court, the deliberative assembly, and the quiet thought of our people can bring to bear. We're called upon to do battle against the unfaithful guardians of our Constitution and liberties, and the hordes of ignorance which are pushing forward only to the ruin of our social and governmental fabric. Too long has the country endured the offenses of the leaders of a party which once knew greatness. Too long have we been blind to the bacchanal of corruption. Too long have we listlessly watched the assembling of the forces that threaten our country and our firesides. The time has come when the salvation of the country demands the restoration to place and power of men of high ideals who will wage unceasing war against corruption in politics, who will enforce the law against both rich and poor, and who will treat guilt as personal and punish it accordingly. What is our duty? To think alike as to men and measures? Impossible, even for our great party. There is not a reactionary among us. All Democrats are progressives. But it is inevitably human that we shall not all agree that in a single highway is found the only road to progress, or each make the same man of all our worthy candidates his first choice. It is possible, however, and it is our duty to put aside all selfishness, to consent cheerfully that the majority shall speak for each of us, and to march out of this convention shoulder to shoulder, intoning the praises of our chosen leader. And that will be his due, whichever of the honorable and able men now claiming our attention shall be chosen. End of section 40. Recording by Paul Adams. www.yawnguy.com. Section 41 of The Art of Public Speaking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Paul Adams. The Art of Public Speaking by Dale Carnegie and Joseph Berg Esenwein. Section 41. Appendix D. Speeches for Study and Practice. John W. Wescott, nominating Woodrow Wilson. At the National Democratic Convention, Baltimore, Maryland, June 1912. The New Jersey delegation is commissioned to represent the great cause of democracy and to offer you, as its militant and triumphant leader, a scholar, not a charlatan, a statesman, not a doctrinaire, a profound lawyer, not a splitter of legal hairs, a political economist, not an egotistical theorist, A practical politician who constructs, modifies, restrains, without disturbance and destruction. A resistless debater and consummate master of statement, not a mere sophist. A humanitarian, not a defamer of characters and lives. A man whose mind is at once cosmopolitan and composite of America. A gentleman of unpretentious habits, with the fear of God in his heart and the love of mankind exhibited in every act of his life. Above all, a public servant who has been tried to the uttermost and never found wanting, matchless, unconquerable, the ultimate Democrat, Woodrow Wilson. New Jersey has reasons for her course. Let us not be deceived in our premises. Campaigns of vilification, corruption, and false pretense have lost their usefulness. The evolution of national energy is towards a more intelligent morality in politics and in all other relations. The situation admits of no compromise. The temper and purpose of the American public will tolerate no other view. The indifference of the American people to politics has disappeared. Any platform and any candidate not conforming to this vast social and commercial behest will go down to ignominious defeat at the polls. Men are known by what they say and do. They are known by those who hate and oppose them. Many years ago, Woodrow Wilson said, "No man is great who thinks himself so, and no man is good who does not try to secure the happiness and comfort of others." This is the secret of his life. The deeds of this moral and intellectual giant are known to all men. They accord not with the shams and false pretenses of politics, but make national harmony with the millions of patriots determined to correct the wrongs of plutocracy and reestablish the maxims of American liberty in all their regnant beauty and practical effectiveness. New Jersey loves Woodrow Wilson, not for the enemies he has made. New Jersey loves him for what he is. New Jersey argues that Woodrow Wilson is the only candidate who can not only make Democratic success a certainty, but secure the electoral vote of almost every state in the Union. New Jersey will endorse his nomination by a majority of 100,000 of the liberated citizens. We're not building for a day or even a generation, but for all time. New Jersey believes that there is an omniscience in national instinct. That instinct centers in Woodrow Wilson. He has been in political life less than 2 years. He has had no organization, only a practical ideal, the reestablishment of equal opportunity. Not his deeds alone, not his immortal words alone, not his personality alone, not his matchless powers alone, but all combined compel national faith and confidence in him. Every crisis evolves its master. Time and circumstance have evolved Woodrow Wilson. The North, the South, the East, and the West unite in him. New Jersey appeals to this convention to give the nation Woodrow Wilson, that he may open the gates of opportunity to every man, woman, and child under our flag. By reforming abuses and thereby teaching them, in his matchless words, to release their energies intelligently, that peace, justice, and prosperity may reign. New Jersey rejoices, through her freely chosen representatives, to name for the presidency of the United States the Princeton schoolmaster, Woodrow Wilson. End of section 41. Recording by Paul Adams, www.yawnguy.com. Section 42 of The Art of Public Speaking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Paul Adams. The Art of Public Speaking by Dale Carnegie and Joseph Berg Esenwein, Section 42. Appendix D, Speeches for Study and Practice. Henry W. Grady, The Race Problem. Delivered at the annual banquet of the Boston Merchants Association at Boston, Massachusetts, December 12, 1889. Mr. President, bidden by your invitation to a discussion of the race problem, forbidden by occasion to make a political speech, I appreciate, in trying to reconcile orders with propriety, the perplexity of the little maid who, bidden to learn to swim, was yet adjured, "Now go, my darling, hang your clothes on a hickory limb, and don't go near the water." The stoutest apostle of the church, they say, is the missionary, and the missionary, wherever he unfurls his flag, will never find himself in deeper need of unction and address than I, bidden tonight to plant the standard of a Southern Democrat in Boston's banquet hall, and to discuss the problem of the races in the home of Phillips and of Sumner. But, Mr. President, if a purpose to speak in perfect frankness and sincerity, if earnest understanding of the vast interests involved, if a consecrating sense of what disaster may follow further misunderstanding and estrangement, if these may be counted upon to steady undisciplined speech and to strengthen an untried arm, then, sir, I shall find the courage to proceed. Happy am I that this mission has brought my feet at last to press New England's historic soil, and my eyes to the knowledge of her beauty and her thrift. Here, within touch of Plymouth Rock and Bunker Hill, where Webster thundered and Longfellow sang, Emerson thought and Channing preached, here, in the cradle of American letters and almost of American liberty, I hasten to make the obeisance that every American owes New England when first he stands uncovered in her mighty presence. Strange apparition! This stern and unique figure, carved from the ocean and the wilderness, its majesty kindling and growing amid the storms of winter and of wars, until at last the gloom was broken, its beauty disclosed in the sunshine, and the heroic workers rested at its base, while startled kings and emperors gazed and marveled that from the rude touch of this handful cast on a bleak and unknown shore should have come the embodied genius of human government and the perfected model of human liberty. God bless the memory of those immortal workers and prosper the fortunes of their living sons and perpetuate the inspiration of their handiwork. 2 years ago, sir, I spoke some words in New York that caught the attention of the North. As I stand here to reiterate, as I have done everywhere, every word I then uttered, to declare that the sentiments I then avowed were universally approved in the South, I realize that the confidence begotten by that speech is largely responsible for my presence here tonight. I should dishonor myself if I betrayed that confidence by uttering one insincere word, or by withholding one essential element of the truth. Apropos of this last, let me confess, Mr. President, before the praise of New England has died on my lips, that I believe the best product of her present life is the procession of 17,000 Vermont Democrats that for 22 years, undiminished by death, unrecruited by birth or conversion, have marched over their rugged hills, cast their Democratic ballots, and gone back home to pray for their unregenerate neighbors, and awake to read the record of 26,000 Republican majority. May the God of the helpless and the heroic help them, and may their sturdy tribe increase. Far to the south, Mr. President, separated from this section by a line, once defined in irrepressible difference, once traced in fratricidal blood and now, thank God, but a vanishing shadow, lies the fairest and richest domain of this earth. It is the home of a brave and hospitable people. There is centered all that can please or prosper humankind. A perfect climate above a fertile soil yields to the husbandman every product of the temperate zone. There by night the cotton whitens beneath the stars, and by day the wheat locks the sunshine in its bearded sheaf. In the same field the clover steals the fragrance of the wind, and tobacco catches the quick aroma of the rains. There are mountains stored with exhaustless treasures, forests vast and primeval, and rivers that, tumbling or loitering, run wanton to the sea. Of the three essential items of all industries, cotton, iron, and wood, that region has easy control. In cotton, a fixed monopoly; in iron, proven supremacy; in timber, the reserve supply of the Republic. From this assured and permanent advantage, against which artificial conditions cannot much longer prevail, has grown an amazing system of industries, not maintained by human contrivance of tariff or capital, afar off from the fullest and cheapest source of supply, but resting in divine assurance, within touch of field and mine and forest, not set amid costly farms from which competition has driven the farmer in despair, but amid cheap and sunny lands, rich with agriculture, to which neither season nor soil has set a limit. This system of industries is mounting to a splendor that shall dazzle and illumine the world. That, sir, is the picture and the promise of my home, a land better and fairer than I have told you, and yet but fit setting in its material excellence for the loyal and gentle quality of its citizenship. Against that, sir, we have New England, recruiting the Republic from its sturdy loins, shaking from its overcrowded hives new swarms of workers, and touching this land all over with its energy and its courage. And yet, while in the El Dorado of which I have told you, but 15% of its lands are cultivated, its mines scarcely touched, and its population so scant that, were it set equidistant, the sound of the human voice could not be heard from Virginia to Texas, while on the threshold of nearly every house in New England stands a son seeking, with troubled eyes, some new land in which to carry his modest patrimony. The strange fact remains that in 1880 the South had fewer Northern-born citizens than she had in 1870, fewer in 70 than in 60. Why is this? Why is it, sir, though the section line be now but a mist that the breath may dispel, fewer men of the North have crossed it over to the South than when it was crimson with the best blood of the Republic, or even when the slaveholders stood guard every inch of its way? There can be but one answer. It is the very problem we're now to consider. The key that opens that problem will unlock to the world the fairest half of this Republic, and free the halted feet of thousands whose eyes are already kindling with its beauty. Better than this, it will open the hearts of brothers for 30 years estranged, and clasp in lasting comradeship a million hands now withheld in doubt. Nothing, sir, but this problem and the suspicions it breeds hinders a clear understanding and a perfect union. Nothing else stands between us and such love as bound Georgia and Massachusetts at Valley Forge and Yorktown, chastened by the sacrifices of Manassas and Gettysburg, and illumined with the coming of better work and a nobler destiny than was ever wrought with the sword or sought at the cannon's mouth. If this does not invite your patient hearing tonight, hear one thing more. My people, your brothers in the South, brothers in blood, in destiny, in all that is best in our past and future, are so beset with this problem that their very existence depends on its right solution. nor are they wholly to blame for its presence. The slave ships of the Republic sailed from your ports. The slaves worked in our fields. You will not defend the traffic, nor I the institution. But I do here declare that in its wise and humane administration, in lifting the slave to heights of which he has not dreamed in his savage home, and giving him a happiness he has not yet found in freedom, our fathers left their sons a saving and excellent heritage. In the storm of war, this institution was lost. I thank God as heartily as you do that human slavery is gone forever from American soil. But the freedman remains, with him a problem without precedent or parallel. Note its appalling conditions. Two utterly dissimilar races on the same soil, with equal political and civil rights, almost equal in numbers, but terribly unequal in intelligence and responsibility. Each pledged against fusion, one for a century in servitude to the other, and freed at last by a desolating war, the experiment sought by neither but approached by both with doubt. These are the conditions. Under these, adverse at every point, we are required to carry these two races in peace and honor to the end. Never, sir, has such a task been given to mortal stewardship. Never before in this republic has the white race divided on the rights of an alien race. The red man was cut down as a weed because he hindered the way of the American citizen. The yellow man was shut out of this republic because he is an alien and inferior. The red man was owner of the land. The yellow man was highly civilized and assimilable. But they hindered both sections and are gone. But the black man, affecting but one section, is clothed with every privilege of government and pinned to the soil, and my people commanded to make good at any hazard and at any cost his full and equal heirship of American privilege and prosperity. It matters not that every other race has been routed or excluded without rhyme or reason. It matters not that wherever the whites and the blacks have touched, in any era or in any clime, there has been an irreconcilable violence. It matters not that no two races, however similar, have lived anywhere, at any time, on the same soil, with equal rights, in peace. In spite of these things, we are commanded to make good this change of American policy, which has not perhaps changed American prejudice, to make certain here what has elsewhere been impossible between whites and blacks, and to reverse, under the very worst conditions, the universal verdict of racial history. And driven, sir, to this superhuman task with an impatience that brooks no delay, a rigor that accepts no excuse, and a suspicion that discourages frankness and sincerity, we do not shrink from this trial. It is so interwoven with our industrial fabric that we cannot disentangle it if we would, so bound up in our honorable obligation to the world that we would not if we could. Can we solve it? The God who gave it into our hands, He alone can know. But this the weakest and wisest of us do know. We cannot solve it with less than your tolerant and patient sympathy, with less than the knowledge that the blood that runs in your veins is our blood, and that, when we have done our best, whether the issue be lost or won, we shall feel your strong arms about us and hear the beating of your approving hearts. The resolute, clear-headed, broad-minded men of the South, the men whose genius made glorious every page of the first 70 years of American history, whose courage and fortitude you tested in 5 years of the fiercest war, whose energy has made bricks without straw and spread splendor amid the ashes of their war-wasted homes, these men wear this problem in their hearts and brains by day and by night. They realize, as you cannot, what this problem means. what they owe to this kindly and dependent race, the measure of their debt to the world, in whose despite they defended and maintained slavery. And though their feet are hindered in its undergrowth, and their march cumbered with its burdens, they have lost neither the patience from which comes clearness, nor the faith from which comes courage. Nor, sir, when in passionate moments is disclosed to them that vague and awful shadow, with its lurid abysses and its crimson stains, into which I pray God they may never go, are they struck with more of apprehension than is needed to complete their consecration. Such is the temper of my people. But what of the problem itself? Mr. President, we need not go one step further unless you concede right here that the people I speak for are as honest, as sensible, and as just as your people, seeking as earnestly as you would in their place to rightly solve the problem that touches them at every vital point. If you insist that they are ruffians, blindly striving with bludgeon and shotgun to plunder and oppress a race, then I shall sacrifice my self-respect and tax your patience in vain. But admit that they are men of common sense and common honesty, wisely modifying an environment they cannot wholly disregard, guiding and controlling as best they can the vicious and irresponsible of either race, compensating error with frankness and retrieving in patience what they lost in passion, and conscious all the time that wrong means ruin. Admit this, and we may reach an understanding tonight. The President of the United States, in his late message to Congress discussing the plea that the South should be left to solve this problem, asks, are they at work upon it? What solution do they offer? When will the black man cast a free ballot? When will he have the civil rights that are his? I shall not here protest against a partisanry that, for the first time in our history, in time of peace, has stamped with the great seal of our government a stigma upon the people of a great and loyal section. Though I gratefully remember that the great dead soldier who held the helm of state for the 8 stormiest years of Reconstruction never found need for such a step, and though there is no personal sacrifice I would not make to remove this cruel and unjust imputation on my people from the archives of my country. But, sir, backed by a record on every page of which is progress, I venture to make earnest and respectful answer to the questions that are asked. We give to the world this year a crop of 7,500,000 bales of cotton, worth $450 million, and its cash equivalent in grain, grasses, and fruit. This enormous crop could not have come from the hands of sullen and discontented labor. It comes from peaceful fields in which laughter and gossip rise above the hum of industry, and contentment runs with the singing plow. It is claimed that this ignorant labor is defrauded of its just hire. I present the tax books of Georgia, which show that the Negro 25 years ago a slave has in Georgia alone $10 million of assessed property, worth twice that much. Does not that record honor him and vindicate his neighbors? What people, penniless, illiterate, has done so well? For every Afro-American agitator stirring the strife in which alone he prospers, I can show you 1,000 Negroes happy in their cabin homes, tilling their own land by day, and at night taking from the lips of their children the helpful message their state sends them from the schoolhouse door. And the schoolhouse itself bears testimony. In Georgia, we added last year $250,000 to the school fund, making a total of more than $1 million. And this in the face of prejudice not yet conquered, of the fact that the whites are assessed for $368 million, the blacks for $10 million, and yet 49% of the beneficiaries are black children. and in the doubt of many wise men if education helps or can help our problem. Charleston, with her taxable values cut half in two since 1860, pays more in proportion for public schools than Boston. Although it is easier to give much out of much than little out of little, the South, with 1/7 of the taxable property of the country, with relatively larger debt, having received only 1/12 as much of public lands, and having back of its tax books none of the $500 million of bonds that enrich the North, and though it pays annually $26 million to your section as pensions, yet gives nearly 1/6 to the public school fund. The South since 1865 has spent $122 million in education, and this year is pledged to spend $32 million more for state and city schools, although the blacks, paying 1/30 of the taxes, get nearly 1/2 of the fund. Go into our fields and see whites and blacks working side by side, on our buildings in the same squad, in our shops at the same forge. Often the blacks crowd the whites from work, or lower wages by their greater need and simpler habits, and yet are permitted, because we want to bar them from no avenue in which their feet are fitted to tread. They could not there be elected orators of white universities, as they have been here, but they do enter there 100 useful trades that are closed against them here. We hold it better and wiser to tend the weeds in the garden than to water the exotic in the window. In the South there are Negro lawyers, teachers, editors, dentists, doctors, preachers, multiplying with the increased ability of their race to support them. In villages and towns they have their military companies equipped from the armories of the state, their churches and societies built and supported largely by their neighbors. What is the testimony of the courts? In penal legislation we have steadily reduced felonies to misdemeanors, and have led the world in mitigating punishment for crime, that we might save, as far as possible, this dependent race from its own weakness. In our penitentiary record, 60% of the prosecutions are Negroes, and in every court the Negro criminal strikes the colored juror that white men may judge his case. In the North, 1 Negro in every 185 is in jail. In the South, only 1 in 446. In the North, the percentage of Negro prisoners is 6 times as great as that of native whites. In the South, only 4 times as great. If prejudice wrongs him in Southern courts, the record shows it to be deeper in Northern courts. I assert here, and a bar as intelligent and upright as the bar of Massachusetts will solemnly endorse my assertion, that in the Southern courts, from highest to lowest, pleading for life, liberty, or property, the Negro has distinct advantage because he is a Negro, apt to be overreached, oppressed, and that this advantage reaches from the juror in making his verdict to the judge in measuring his sentence. Now, Mr. President, can it be seriously maintained that we are terrorizing the people from whose willing hands comes every year $1,000 million of farm crops? Or have robbed a people who, 25 years from unrewarded slavery, have amassed in one state $20 million of property? Or that we intend to oppress the people we are arming every day? Or deceive them when we are educating them to the utmost limit of our ability? Or outlaw them when we work side by side with them? Or re-enslave them under legal forms, when for their benefit we have even imprudently narrowed the limit of felonies and mitigated the severity of law? My fellow countrymen, as you yourselves may sometimes have to appeal at the bar of human judgment for justice and for right, give to my people tonight the fair and unanswerable conclusion of these incontestable facts. But it is claimed that under this fair seeming there is disorder and violence. This I admit. And there will be until there is one ideal community on earth after which we may pattern. But how widely is it misjudged? It is hard to measure with exactness whatever touches the Negro, his helplessness, his isolation, his century of servitude. These dispose us to emphasize and magnify his wrongs. This disposition, inflamed by prejudice and partisanry, has led to injustice and delusion. Lawless men may ravage a county in Iowa, and it is accepted as an incident. In the South, a drunken row is declared to be the fixed habit of the community. Regulators may whip vagabonds in Indiana by platoons, and it scarcely arrests attention. A chance collision in the South among relatively the same classes is gravely accepted as evidence that one race is destroying the other. We might as well claim that the Union was ungrateful to the colored soldier who followed its flag because a Grand Army post in Connecticut closed its door to a Negro veteran, as for you to give racial significance to every incident in the South, or to accept exceptional grounds as the rule of our society. I am not one of those who becloud American honor with the parade of the outrages of either section and belie American character by declaring them to be significant and representative. I prefer to maintain that they are neither and stand for nothing but the passion and sin of our poor fallen humanity. If society, like a machine, were no stronger than its weakest part, I should despair of both sections. But knowing that society, sentient and responsible in every fiber, can mend and repair until the whole has the strength of the best, I despair of neither. These gentlemen who come with me here, knit into Georgia's busy life as they are, never saw, I dare assert, an outrage committed on a Negro. And if they did, no one of you would be swifter to prevent or punish. It is through them and the men and women who think with them, making 9/10 of every Southern community, that these two races have been carried thus far with less of violence than would have been possible anywhere else on earth. And in their fairness and courage and steadfastness, more than in all the laws that can be passed, all the bayonets that can be mustered, is the hope of our future. When will the blacks cast a free ballot? When ignorance anywhere is not dominated by the will of the intelligent. When the laborer anywhere casts a vote unhindered by his boss. When the vote of the poor anywhere is not influenced by the power of the rich. When the strong and the steadfast do not everywhere control the suffrage of the weak and shiftless, then, and not till then, will the ballot of the Negro be free. The white people of the South are banded, Mr. President, not in prejudice against the blacks, not in sectional estrangement, not in the hope of political dominion, but in a deep and abiding necessity. Here is this vast, ignorant, and purchasable vote, clannish, credulous, impulsive, and passionate, tempting every art of the demagogue, but insensible to the appeal of the statesman. Wrongly started in that it was led into alienation from its neighbor and taught to rely on the protection of an outside force, it cannot be merged and lost in the two great parties through logical currents, for it lacks political conviction, and even that information on which conviction must be based. It must remain a faction, strong enough in every community to control on the slightest division of the whites. Under that division it becomes the prey of the cunning and unscrupulous of both parties. Its credulity is imposed upon, its patience inflamed, its cupidity tempted, its impulses misdirected, and even its superstition made to play its part in a campaign in which every interest of society is jeopardized and every approach to the ballot box debauched. It is against such campaigns as this, the folly and the bitterness and the danger of which every Southern community has drunk deeply, that the white people of the South are banded together. Just as you in Massachusetts would be banded if 300,000 men, not one in 100 able to read his ballot, banded in race instinct, holding against you the memory of a century of slavery, taught by your late conquerors to distrust and oppose you, had already travestied legislation from your state house, and in every species of folly or villainy had wasted your substance and exhausted your credit. But admitting the right of the whites to unite against this tremendous menace, we are challenged with the smallness of our vote. This has long been flippantly charged to be evidence, and has now been solemnly and efficiently declared to be proof of political turpitude and baseness on our part. Let us see. Virginia, a state now under fierce assault for this alleged crime, cast in 1888 75% of her vote. Massachusetts, the state in which I speak, 60% of her vote. Was it suppression in Virginia and natural causes in Massachusetts? Last month Virginia cast 69% of her vote, and Massachusetts, fighting in every district, cast only 49% of hers. If Virginia is condemned because 31% of her vote was silent, how shall this state escape, in which 51% was dumb? Let us enlarge this comparison. The 16 Southern states in '88 cast 67% of their total vote. The 6 New England states but 63% of theirs. By what fair rule shall the stigma be put upon one section while the other escapes? A congressional election in New York last week, with the polling place in touch of every voter, brought out only 6,000 votes of 28,000. And the lack of opposition is assigned as the natural cause. In a district in my state in which an opposition speech has not been heard in 10 years and the polling places are miles apart, under the unfair reasoning of which my section has been a constant victim, the small vote is charged to be proof of forcible suppression. In Virginia, an average majority of 12,000, and less hopeless division of the minority, was raised to 42,000. In Iowa, in the same election, a majority of 32,000 was wiped out, and an opposition majority of 8,000 was established. The change of 40,000 votes in Iowa is accepted as political revolution. In Virginia, an increase of 30,000 on a safe majority is declared to be proof of political fraud. It is deplorable, sir, that in both sections a larger percentage of the vote is not regularly cast, but more inexplicable that this should be so in New England than in the South. What invites the Negro to the ballot box? He knows that of all men it has promised him most and yielded him least. His first appeal to suffrage was the promise of 40 acres and a mule. His second, the threat that democratic success meant his re-enslavement. Both have been proved false in his experience. He looked for a home and he got the Freedmen's Bank. He fought under promise of the loaf and in victory was denied the crumbs. Discouraged and deceived, he has realized at last that his best friends are his neighbors, with whom his lot is cast and whose prosperity is bound up in his, and that he has gained nothing in politics to compensate the loss of their confidence and sympathy. That is at last his best and enduring hope. And so, without leaders or organization, and lacking the resolute heroism of my party friends in Vermont that make their hopeless march over the hills a high and inspiring pilgrimage, he shrewdly measures the occasional agitator, balances his little account with politics, touches up his mule and jogs down the furrow, letting the mad world wag as it will. The Negro voter can never control in the South, and it would be well if partisans at the North would understand this. I have seen the white people of a state set about by black hosts until their fate seemed sealed. But, sir, some brave men, banding them together, would rise as Elisha rose in beleaguered Samaria, and, touching their eyes with faith, bid them look abroad to see the very air filled with the chariots of Israel and the horsemen thereof. If there is any human force that cannot be withstood, it is the power of the banded intelligence and responsibility of a free community. Against it, numbers and corruption cannot prevail. It cannot be forbidden in the law or divorced in force. It is the inalienable right of every free community, the just and righteous safeguard against an ignorant or corrupt suffrage. It is on this, sir, that we rely in the South. Not the cowardly menace of mask or shotgun, but the peaceful majesty of intelligence and responsibility, massed and unified for the protection of its homes and the preservation of its liberty. That, sir, is our reliance and our hope, and against it all the powers of earth shall not prevail. It is just as certain that Virginia would come back to the unchallenged control of a white race, that before the moral and material power of her people once more unified, opposition would crumble until its last desperate leader was left alone, vainly striving to rally his disordered hosts, as that night should fade in the kindling glory of the sun. You may pass force bills, but they will not avail. You may surrender your own liberties to federal election law. You may submit in fear of a necessity that does not exist, that the very form of this government may be changed. You may invite federal interference with the New England town meeting that has been for 100 years the guarantee of local government in America. This old state, which holds in its charter the boast that it is a free and independent commonwealth, may deliver its election machinery into the hands of the government it helped to create. But never, sir, will a single state of this Union, North or South, be delivered again to the control of an ignorant and inferior race. We wrested our state governments from Negro supremacy when the federal drumbeat rolled closer to the ballot box and federal bayonets hedged it deeper about than will ever again be permitted in this free government. But, sir, though the cannon of this republic thundered in every voting district in the South, we still should find in the mercy of God the means and the courage to prevent its reestablishment. I regret, sir, that my section, hindered with this problem, stands in seeming estrangement to the North. If, sir, any man will point out to me a path down which the white people of the South, divided, may walk in peace and honor, I will take that path, though I take it alone, for at its end, and nowhere else, I fear, is to be found the full prosperity of my section and the full restoration of this Union. But, sir, if the Negro had not been enfranchised, the South would have been divided and the Republic united. His enfranchisement, against which I enter no protest, holds the South united and compact. What solution, then, can we offer for the problem? Time alone can disclose it to us. We simply report progress and ask your patience. If the problem be solved at all, and I firmly believe it will, though nowhere else has it been, it will be solved by the people most deeply bound in interest, most deeply pledged in honor to its solution. I had rather see my people render back this question rightly solved than to see them gather all the spoils over which faction has contended since Catiline conspired and Caesar fought. Meantime, we treat the Negro fairly, measuring to him justice in the fullness the strong should give to the weak, and leading him in the steadfast ways of citizenship, that he may no longer be the prey of the unscrupulous and the sport of the thoughtless. We open to him every pursuit in which he can prosper, and seek to broaden his training and capacity. We seek to hold his confidence and friendship, and to pin him to the soil with ownership, that he may catch in the fire of his own hearthstone that sense of responsibility the shiftless can never know. And we gather him into that alliance of intelligence and responsibility that, though it now runs close to racial lines, welcomes the responsible and intelligent of any race. By this course, confirmed in our judgment and justified in the progress already made, we hope to progress slowly but surely to the end. The love we feel for that race you cannot measure nor comprehend. As I attested here, the spirit of my old black mammy from her home up there looks down to bless, and through the tumult of this night steals the sweet music of her croonings, as 30 years ago she held me in her black arms and led me smiling to sleep. This scene vanishes as I speak, and I catch a vision of an old Southern home with its lofty pillars and its white pigeons fluttering down through the golden air. I see women with strained and anxious faces and children alert yet helpless. I see night come down with its dangers and its apprehensions, and in a big, homely room I feel on my tired head the touch of loving hands, now worn and wrinkled, but fairer to me yet than the hands of mortal woman, and stronger yet to lead me than the hands of mortal man, as they lay a mother's blessing there, while at her knees, the truest altar I yet have found, I thank God that she is safe in her sanctuary, because her slaves, sentinel in the silent cabin or guard at her chamber door, put a black man's loyalty between her and danger. I catch another vision, the crisis of battle, a soldier struck, staggering, fallen. I see a slave scuffing through the smoke, winding his black arms about the fallen form, reckless of hurtling death, bending his trusty face to catch the words that tremble on the stricken lips, so wrestling meantime with agony that he would lay down his life in his master's stead. I see him by the weary bedside, ministering with uncomplaining patience, praying with all his humble heart that God will lift his master up until death comes in mercy and in honor to still the soldier's agony and seal the soldier's life. I see him by the open grave, mute, motionless, uncovered, suffering for the death of him who in life fought against his freedom. I see him when the mold is heaped and the great drama of his life is closed, turn away and with downcast eyes and uncertain step start out into new and strange fields, faltering, struggling, but moving on, until his shambling figure is lost in the light of this better and brighter day. And from the grave comes a voice saying, "Follow him, put your arms about him in his need, even as he put his about me. Be his friend as he was mine." And out into this new world, strange to me as to him, dazzling, bewildering both, I follow. And may God forget my people when they forget these. Whatever the future may hold for them, whether they plod along in the servitude from which they have never been lifted since the Cyrenian was laid hold upon by the Roman soldiers and made to bear the cross of the fainting Christ, whether they find homes again in Africa and thus hasten the prophecy of the psalmist who said, "And suddenly Ethiopia shall hold out her hands unto God," whether forever dislocated and separate, they remain a weak people beset by stronger, and exist, as the Turk who lives in the jealousy rather than in the conscience of Europe, or whether in this miraculous republic they break through the caste of 20 centuries and, belying universal history, reach the full stature of citizenship, and in peace maintain it, we shall give them uttermost justice and abiding friendship. And whatever we do, unto whatever seeming estrangement we may be driven, nothing shall disturb the love we bear this republic or mitigate our consecration to its service. I stand here, Mr. President, to profess no new loyalty. When General Lee, whose heart was the temple of our hopes and whose arm was clothed with our strength, renewed his allegiance to this government at Appomattox, he spoke from a heart too great to be false, and he spoke for every honest man from Maryland to Texas. From that day to this, Hamilcar has nowhere in the South sworn young Hannibal to hatred and vengeance, but everywhere to loyalty and to love. Witness the veteran standing at the base of a Confederate monument above the graves of his comrades, his empty sleeve tossing in the April wind, adjuring the young men about him to serve as earnest and loyal citizens the government against which their fathers fought. This message, delivered from that sacred presence, has gone home to the hearts of my fellows. And, sir, I declare here, if physical courage be always equal to human aspiration, that they would die, sir, if need be, to restore this republic their fathers fought to dissolve. Such, Mr. President, is this problem as we see it. Such is the temper in which we approach it. Such the progress made. What do we ask of you? First, patience. Out of this alone can come perfect work. Second, confidence. In this alone can you judge fairly. Third, sympathy. In this you can help us best. Fourth, give us your sons as hostages. When you plant your capital in millions, send your sons that they may know how true are our hearts and may help to swell the Caucasian current until it can carry without danger this black infusion. Fifth, loyalty to the Republic, for there is sectionalism in loyalty as in estrangement. This hour little needs the loyalty that is loyal to one section and yet holds the other in enduring suspicion and estrangement. Give us the broad and perfect loyalty that loves and trusts Georgia alike with Massachusetts, that knows no South, no North, no East, no West, but endears with equal and patriotic love every foot of our soil, every state of our Union. A mighty duty, sir, and a mighty inspiration impels every one of us tonight to lose in patriotic consecration whatever estranges, whatever divides. We, sir, are Americans, and we stand for human liberty. The uplifting force of the American idea is under every throne on earth. France, Brazil, these are our victories. To redeem the earth from kingcraft and oppression, this is our mission, and we shall not fail. God has sown in our soil the seed of his millennial harvest, and he will not lay the sickle to the ripening crop until his full and perfect day has come. Our history, sir, has been a constant and expanding miracle from Plymouth Rock and Jamestown all the way, aye, even from the hour when from the voiceless and traceless ocean a new world rose to the sight of the inspired sailor. As we approach the 4th centennial of that stupendous day when the old world will come to marvel and to learn amid our gathered treasures, let us resolve to crown the miracles of our past with the spectacle of a republic. Compact, united, indissoluble in the bonds of love, loving from the lakes to the Gulf, the wounds of war healed in every heart as on every hill, serene and resplendent at the summit of human achievement and earthly glory, blazing out the path and making clear the way up which all the nations of the earth must come in God's appointed time. End of section 42. Recording by Paul Adams. www.yawnguy.com. Section 43 of the Art of Public Speaking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Paul Adams. The Art of Public Speaking by Dale Carnegie and Joseph Berg Esenwein. Section 43, Appendix D, Speeches for Study and Practice. William McKinley, Last Speech. Delivered at the World's Fair, Buffalo, New York, on September 5, 1901, the day before he was assassinated. I am glad again to be in the city of Buffalo and exchange greetings with her people, to whose generous hospitality I am not a stranger, and with whose goodwill I have been repeatedly and signally honored. Today I have additional satisfaction in meeting and giving welcome to the foreign representatives assembled here, whose presence and participation in this exposition have contributed in so marked a degree to its interest and success. To the Commissioners of the Dominion of Canada and the British colonies, the French colonies, the republics of Mexico and of Central and South America, and the Commissioners of Cuba and Puerto Rico, who share with us in this undertaking, we give the hand of fellowship and felicitate with them upon the triumphs of art, science, education, and manufacture, which the old has bequeathed to the new century. Expositions are the timekeepers of progress. They record the world's advancement. They stimulate the energy, enterprise, and intellect of the people and quicken human genius. They go into the home. They broaden and brighten the daily life of the people. They open mighty storehouses of information to the student. Every exposition, great or small, has helped to some onward step. Comparison of ideas is always educational, and, as such, instructs the brain and hand of man. Friendly rivalry follows, which is the spur to industrial improvement, the inspiration to useful invention, and to high endeavor in all departments of human activity. It exacts a study of the wants, comforts, and even the whims of the people, and recognizes the efficacy of high quality and low prices to win their favor. The quest for trade is an incentive to men of business to devise, invent, improve, and economize in the cost of production. Business life, whether among ourselves or with other peoples, is ever a sharp struggle for success. It will be none the less in the future. Without competition, we would be clinging to the clumsy and antiquated process of farming and manufacture and the methods of business of long ago, and the 20th would be no further advanced than the 18th century. But though commercial competitors we are, commercial enemies we must not be. The Pan American Exposition has done its work thoroughly, presenting in its exhibits evidences of the highest skill and illustrating the progress of the human family in the Western Hemisphere. This portion of the earth has no cause for humiliation for the part it has performed in the march of civilization. It has not accomplished everything, far from it. It has simply done its best. And without vanity or boastfulness, and recognizing the manifold achievements of others, it invites the friendly rivalry of all the powers in the peaceful pursuits of trade and commerce, and will cooperate with all in advancing the highest and best interests of humanity. The wisdom and energy of all the nations are none too great for the world work. The success of art, science, industry, and invention is an international asset and a common glory. After all, how near one to the other is every part of the world. Modern inventions have brought into close relation widely separated peoples and make them better acquainted. Geographic and political divisions will continue to exist, but distances have been effaced. Swift ships and fast trains are becoming cosmopolitan. They invade fields which a few years ago were impenetrable. The world's products are exchanged as never before, and with increasing transportation facilities come increasing knowledge and larger trade. Prices are fixed with mathematical precision by supply and demand. The world's selling prices are regulated by market and crop reports. We travel greater distances in a shorter space of time and with more ease than was ever dreamed of by the fathers. Isolation is no longer possible or desirable. The same important news is read, though in different languages, the same day in all Christendom. The telegraph keeps us advised of what is occurring everywhere, and the press foreshadows, with more or less accuracy, the plans and purposes of the nations. Market prices of products and of securities are hourly known in every commercial mart, and the investments of the people extend beyond their own national boundaries into the remotest parts of the earth. Vast transactions are conducted and international exchanges are made by the tick of the cable. Every event of interest is immediately bulletined. The quick gathering and transmission of news, like rapid transit, are of recent origin and are only made possible by the genius of the inventor and the courage of the investor. It took a special messenger of the government, with every facility known at the time for rapid travel, 19 days to go from the city of Washington to New Orleans with a message to General Jackson that the war with England had ceased and a treaty of peace had been signed. How different now! We reached General Miles in Puerto Rico, and he was able through the military telegraph to stop his army on the firing line with the message that the United States and Spain had signed a protocol suspending hostilities. We knew almost instanter of the first shots fired at Santiago, and the subsequent surrender of the Spanish forces was known at Washington within less than an hour of its consummation. The first ship of Cervera's fleet had hardly emerged from that historic harbor when the fact was flashed to our capital, and the swift destruction that followed was announced immediately through the wonderful medium of telegraphy. So accustomed are we to safe and easy communication with distant lands that its temporary interruption, even in ordinary times, results in loss and inconvenience. We shall never forget the days of anxious waiting and suspense when no information was permitted to be sent from Pekin, and the diplomatic representatives of the nations in China, cut off from all communication inside and outside of the walled capital, were surrounded by an angry and misguided mob that threatened their lives. Nor the joy that thrilled the world when a single message from the government of the United States brought through our minister the first news of the safety of the besieged diplomats. At the beginning of the 19th century, there was not a mile of steam railroad on the globe. Now there are enough miles to make its circuit many times. Then there was not a line of electric telegraph. Now we have a vast mileage traversing all lands and seas. God and man have linked the nations together. No nation can longer be indifferent to any other. And as we are brought more and more in touch with each other, the less occasion is there for misunderstandings, and the stronger the disposition, when we have differences, to adjust them in the court of arbitration, which is the noblest forum for the settlement of international disputes. My fellow citizens, trade statistics indicate that this country is in a state of unexampled prosperity. The figures are almost appalling. They show that we are utilizing our fields and forests and mines, and that we are furnishing profitable employment to the millions of working men throughout the United States, bringing comfort and happiness to their homes, and making it possible to lay by savings for old age and disability. That all the people are participating in this great prosperity is seen in every American community and shown by the enormous, unprecedented deposits in our savings banks. Our duty in the care and security of these deposits and their safe investment demands the highest integrity and the best business capacity of those in charge of these depositories of the people's earnings. We have a vast and intricate business built up through years of toil and struggle, in which every part of the country has its stake, which will not permit of either neglect or of undue selfishness. No narrow, sordid policy will subserve it. The greatest skill and wisdom on the part of manufacturers and producers will be required to hold and increase it. Our industrial enterprises, which have grown to such great proportions, affect the homes and occupations of the people and the welfare of the country. Our capacity to produce has developed so enormously, and our products have so multiplied, that the problem of more markets requires our urgent and immediate attention. Only a broad and enlightened policy will keep what we have. No other policy will get more. In these times of marvelous business energy and gain, we ought to be looking to the future, strengthening the weak places in our industrial and commercial systems, that we may be ready for any storm or strain. By sensible trade arrangements which will not interrupt our home production, we shall extend the outlets for our increasing surplus. A system which provides a mutual exchange of commodities is manifestly essential to the continued and healthful growth of our export trade. We must not repose in the fancied security that we can forever sell everything and buy little or nothing. If such a thing were possible, it would not be best for us or for those with whom we deal. We should take from our customers such of their products as we can use without harm to our industries and labor. Reciprocity is the natural outgrowth of our wonderful industrial development under the domestic policy now firmly established. What we produce beyond our domestic consumption must have a vent abroad. The excess must be relieved through a foreign outlet, and we should sell everywhere we can and buy wherever the buying will enlarge our sales and productions and thereby make a greater demand for home labor. The period of exclusiveness is past. The expansion of our trade and commerce is the pressing problem. Commercial wars are unprofitable. A policy of goodwill and friendly trade relations will prevent reprisals. Reciprocity treaties are in harmony with the spirit of the times. Measures of retaliation are not. If, perchance, some of our tariffs are no longer needed for revenue or to encourage and protect our industries at home, why should they not be employed to extend and promote our markets abroad? Then, too, we have inadequate steamship service. New lines of steamships have already been put in commission between the Pacific coast ports of the United States and those on the western coasts of Mexico and Central and South America. These should be followed up with direct steamship lines between the western coast of the United States and South American ports. One of the needs of the times is direct commercial lines from our vast fields of production to the fields of consumption that we have but barely touched. Next in advantage to having the thing to sell is to have the conveyance to carry it to the buyer. We must encourage our merchant marine. We must have more ships. They must be under the American flag, built and manned and owned by Americans. These will not only be profitable in a commercial sense, they will be messengers of peace and amity wherever they go. We must build the Isthmian Canal, which will unite the two oceans and give a straight line of water communication with the western coasts of Central and South America and Mexico. The construction of a Pacific cable cannot be longer postponed. In the furtherance of these objects of national interest and concern, you are performing an important part. This exposition would have touched the heart of that American statesman whose mind was ever alert and thought ever constant for a larger commerce and a truer fraternity of the republics of the New World. His broad American spirit is felt and manifested here. He needs no identification to an assemblage of Americans anywhere, for the name of Blaine is inseparably associated with the Pan-American movement which finds here practical and substantial expression, and which we all hope will be firmly advanced by the Pan-American Congress that assembles this autumn in the capital of Mexico. The good work will go on. It cannot be stopped. Those buildings will disappear. This creation of art and beauty and industry will perish from sight. But their influence will remain to make it live beyond its too short living with praises and thanksgiving. Who can tell the new thoughts that have been awakened, the ambitions fired, and the high achievements that will be wrought through this exposition? Gentlemen, let us ever remember that our interest is in concord, not conflict, and that our real eminence rests in the victories of peace, not those of war. We hope that all who are represented here may be moved to higher and nobler efforts for their own and the world's good, and that out of this city may come not only greater commerce and trade for us all, but more essential than these, relations of mutual respect, confidence, and friendship, which will deepen and endure. Our earnest prayer is that God will graciously vouchsafe prosperity, happiness, and peace to all our neighbors, and like blessings to all the peoples and powers of earth. End of section 43. Recording by Paul Adams. www.yawnguy.com. Section 44 of The Art of Public Speaking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Paul Adams. The Art of Public Speaking by Dale Carnegie and Joseph Berg Esenwein. Section 44, Appendix D, Speeches for Study and Practice. John Hay, Tribute to McKinley. From his memorial address at a joint session of the Senate and House of Representatives on February 27, 1903. For the third time, the Congress of the United States are assembled to commemorate the life and the death of a president slain by the hand of an assassin. The attention of the future historian will be attracted to the features which reappear with startling sameness in all three of these awful crimes: the uselessness, the utter lack of consequence of the act, the obscurity, the insignificance of the criminal, the blamelessness, so far as in our sphere of existence the best of men may be held blameless, of the victim. Not one of our murdered presidents had an enemy in the world. They were all of such preeminent purity of life that no pretext could be given for the attack of passional crime. They were all men of democratic instincts who could never have offended the most jealous advocates of equity. They were of kindly and generous nature, to whom wrong or injustice was impossible. Of moderate fortune, whose slender means nobody could envy. They were men of austere virtue, of tender heart, of eminent abilities, which they had devoted with single minds to the good of the Republic. If ever men walked before God and man without blame, it was these three rulers of our people. The only temptation to attack their lives offered was their gentle radiance. To eyes hating the light, that was offense enough. The stupid uselessness of such an infamy affronts the common sense of the world. One can conceive how the death of a dictator may change the political conditions of an empire, how the extinction of a narrowing line of kings may bring in an alien dynasty. But in a well-ordered republic like ours, the ruler may fall, but the state feels no tremor. Our beloved and revered leader is gone, but the natural process of our laws provides us a successor, identical in purpose and ideals, nourished by the same teachings, inspired by the same principles, pledged by tender affection as well as by high loyalty to carry to completion the immense task committed to his hands, and to smite with iron severity every manifestation of that hideous crime which his mild predecessor with his dying breath forgave. The sayings of celestial wisdom have no date. The words that reach us over 2,000 years out of the darkest hour of gloom the world has ever known are true to life today. They know not what they do. The blow struck at our dear friend and ruler was as deadly as blind hate could make it, but the blow struck at anarchy was deadlier still. How many countries can join with us in the community of a kindred sorrow? I will not speak of those distant regions where assassination enters into the daily life of government. But among the nations bound to us by the ties of familiar intercourse, who can forget that wise and mild autocrat who had earned the proud title of the Liberator, that enlightened and magnanimous citizen whom France still mourns, that brave and chivalrous King of Italy who only lived for his people, and, saddest of all, that lovely and sorrowing Empress whose harmless life could hardly have excited the animosity of a demon. Against that devilish spirit nothing avails, neither virtue nor patriotism, nor age nor youth, nor conscience nor pity. We cannot even say that education is a sufficient safeguard against this baleful evil, for most of the wretches whose crimes have so shocked humanity in recent years were men not unlettered, who have gone from the common schools through murder to the scaffold. The life of William McKinley was, from his birth to his death, typically American. There is no environment, I should say, anywhere else in the world which could produce just such a character. He was born into that way of life which elsewhere is called the middle class, but which in this country is so nearly universal as to make of other classes an almost negligible quantity. He was neither rich nor poor, neither proud nor humble. He knew no hunger he was not sure of satisfying, no luxury which could enervate mind or body. His parents were sober, God-fearing people, intelligent and upright, without pretension and without humility. He grew up in the company of boys like himself, wholesome, honest, self-respecting. They looked down on nobody. They never felt it possible they could be looked down upon. Their houses were the homes of probity, piety, patriotism. They learned in the admirable school readers of 50 years ago the lessons of heroic and splendid life which have come down from the past. They read in their weekly newspapers the story of the world's progress, in which they were eager to take part, and of the sins and wrongs of civilization with which they burned to do battle. It was a serious and thoughtful time. The boys of that day felt dimly but deeply that days of sharp struggle and high achievement were before them. They looked at life with the wondering yet resolute eyes of a young esquire in his vigil of arms. They felt a time was coming when to them should be addressed the stern admonition of the apostle, "Quit you like men, be strong." The men who are living today and were young in 1860 will never forget the glory and glamour that filled the earth and the sky when the long twilight of doubt and uncertainty was ending and the time for action had come. A speech by Abraham Lincoln was an event not only of high moral significance but of far-reaching importance. The drilling of a militia company by Ellsworth attracted national attention. The fluttering of the flag in the clear sky drew tears from the eyes of young men. Patriotism, which had been a rhetorical expression, became a passionate emotion in which instinct, logic, and feeling were fused. The country was worth saving. It could be saved only by fire. No sacrifice was too great. The young men of the country were ready for the sacrifice. Come weal, come woe, they were ready. At 17 years of age, William McKinley heard this summons of his country. He was the sort of youth to whom a military life in ordinary times would possess no attractions. His nature was far different from that of the ordinary soldier. He had other dreams of life, its prizes and pleasures, than that of marches and battles. But to his mind there was no choice or question. The banner floating in the morning breeze was the beckoning gesture of his country. The thrilling note of the trumpet called him and none other, into the ranks. His portrait in his first uniform is familiar to you all. The short, stocky figure, the quiet, thoughtful face, the deep, dark eyes. It is the face of a lad who could not stay at home when he thought he was needed in the field. He was of the stuff of which good soldiers are made. Had he been 10 years older, he would have entered at the head of a company and come out at the head of a division. But he did what he could. He enlisted as a private. He learned to obey. His serious, sensible ways, his prompt, alert efficiency soon attracted the attention of his superiors. He was so faithful in little things that they gave him more and more to do. He was untiring in camp and on the march, swift, cool, and fearless in fight. He left the army with field rank when the war ended, brevetted by President Lincoln for gallantry in battle. In coming years, when men seek to draw the moral of our great Civil War, nothing will seem to them so admirable in all the history of our two magnificent armies as the way in which the war came to a close. When the Confederate army saw the time had come, they acknowledged the pitiless logic of facts and ceased fighting. When the army of the Union saw it was no longer needed, without a murmur or question, making no terms, asking no return, in the flush of victory and fullness of might, it laid down its arms and melted back into the mass of peaceful citizens. There is no event since the nation was born which has so proved its solid capacity for self-government. Both sections share equally in that crown of glory. They had held a debate of incomparable importance and had fought it out with equal energy. A conclusion had been reached, and it is to the everlasting honor of both sides that they each knew when the war was over and the hour of a lasting peace had struck. We may admire the desperate daring of others who prefer annihilation to compromise, but the palm of common sense and, I will say, of enlightened patriotism belongs to the men like Grant and Lee, who knew when they had fought enough for honor and for country. So it came naturally about that in 1876, the beginning of the second century of the Republic, he began, by an election to Congress, his political career. Thereafter, for 14 years, this chamber was his home. I use the word advisedly. Nowhere in the world was he so in harmony with his environment as here. Nowhere else did his mind work with such full consciousness of its powers. The air of debate was native to him. Here he drank delight of battle with his peers. In after days, when he drove by this stately pile, or when on rare occasions his duty called him here, he greeted his old haunts with the affectionate zest of a child of the house. During all the last 10 years of his life, filled as they were with activity and glory, he never ceased to be homesick for this hall. When he came to the presidency, there was not a day when his congressional service was not of use to him. Probably no other president has been in such full and cordial communion with Congress, if we may except Lincoln alone. McKinley knew the legislative body thoroughly, its composition, its methods, its habit of thought. He had the profoundest respect for its authority and an inflexible belief in the ultimate rectitude of its purposes. Our history shows how surely an executive courts disaster and ruin by assuming an attitude of hostility or distrust to the legislature. And, on the other hand, McKinley's frank and sincere trust and confidence in Congress were repaid by prompt and loyal support and cooperation. During his entire term of office, this mutual trust and regard, so essential to the public welfare, was never shadowed by a single cloud. When he came to the presidency, he confronted a situation of the utmost difficulty, which might well have appalled a man of less serene and tranquil self-confidence. There had been a state of profound commercial and industrial depression, from which his friends had said his election would relieve the country. Our relations with the outside world left much to be desired. The feeling between the northern and southern sections of the Union was lacking in the cordiality which was necessary to the welfare of both. Hawaii had asked for annexation and had been rejected by the preceding administration. There was a state of things in the Caribbean which could not permanently endure. Our neighbor's house was on fire, and there were grave doubts as to our rights and duties in the premises. A man either weak or rash, either irresolute or headstrong, might have brought ruin on himself and incalculable harm to the country. The least desirable form of glory to a man of his habitual mood and temper, that of successful war, was nevertheless conferred upon him by uncontrollable events. He felt it must come. He deplored its necessity. He strained, almost to breaking, his relations with his friends in order first to prevent and then to postpone it to the latest possible moment. But when the die was cast, he labored with the utmost energy and ardor, and with an intelligence in military matters which showed how much of the soldier still survived in the mature statesman to push forward the war to a decisive close. War was an anguish to him. He wanted it short and conclusive. His merciful zeal communicated itself to his subordinates, and the war, so long dreaded, whose consequences were so momentous, ended in 100 days. Mr. McKinley was re-elected by an overwhelming majority. There had been little doubt of the result among well-informed people, but when it was known, a profound feeling of relief and renewal of trust were evident among the leaders of capital and industry, not only in this country but everywhere. They felt that the immediate future was secure and that trade and commerce might safely push forward in every field of effort and enterprise. He felt that the harvest time was come to garner in the fruits of so much planting and culture, and he was determined that nothing he might do or say should be liable to the reproach of a personal interest. Let us say frankly, he was a party man. He believed the policies advocated by him and his friends counted for much in the country's progress and prosperity. He hoped in his second term to accomplish substantial results in the development and affirmation of those policies. I spent a day with him shortly before he started on his fateful journey to Buffalo. Never had I seen him higher in hope and patriotic confidence. He was gratified to the heart that we had arranged a treaty which gave us a free hand in the isthmus. In fancy he saw the canal already built and the argosies of the world passing through it in peace and amity. He saw in the immense evolution of American trade the fulfillment of all his dreams, the reward of all his labors. He was, I need not say, an ardent protectionist, never more sincere and devoted than during those last days of his life. He regarded reciprocity as the bulwark of protection, not a breach but a fulfillment of the law. The treaties which for 4 years had been preparing under his personal supervision he regarded as ancillary to the general scheme. He was opposed to any revolutionary plan of change in the existing legislation. He was careful to point out that everything he had done was in faithful compliance with the law itself. In that mood of high hope, of generous expectation, he went to Buffalo, and there, on the threshold of eternity, he delivered that memorable speech, worthy for its loftiness of tone, its blameless morality, its breadth of view, to be regarded as his testament to the nation. Through all his pride of country and his joy of its success runs the note of solemn warning, as in Kipling's noble hymn, "Lest We Forget." The next day sped the bolt of doom, and for a week after, in an agony of dread, broken by elusive glimpses of hope that our prayers might be answered, the nation waited for the end. Nothing in the glorious life we saw gradually waning was more admirable and exemplary than its close. The gentle humanity of his words when he saw his assailant in danger of summary vengeance. "Do not let them hurt him." His chivalrous care that the news should be broken gently to his wife, the fine courtesy with which he apologized for the damage which his death would bring to the great exhibition, and the heroic resignation of his final words, "It is God's way, His will, not ours, be done," were all the instinctive expressions of a nature so lofty and so pure that pride in its nobility at once softened and enhanced the nation's sense of loss. The Republic grieved over such a son, but is proud forever of having produced him. After all, in spite of its tragic ending, his life was extraordinarily happy. He had all his days troops of friends, the cheer of fame and fruitful labor, and he became at last, on fortune's crowning slope, the pillar of a people's hope, the center of a world's desire. End of section 44. Recording by Paul Adams, www.yawnguy.com. Section 45 of The Art of Public Speaking. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Paul Adams. The Art of Public Speaking by Dale Carnegie and Joseph Berg Esenwein. Section 45, Appendix D, Speeches for Study and Practice. William Jennings Bryan, The Prince of Peace, 1894. I offer no apology for speaking upon a religious theme, for it is the most universal of all themes. I am interested in the science of government, but I am interested more in religion than in government. I enjoy making a political speech. I've made a good many and shall make more, but I would rather speak on religion than on politics. I commenced speaking on the stump when I was only 20, but I commenced speaking in the church 6 years earlier, and I shall be in the church even after I am put out of politics. I feel sure of my ground when I make a political speech, but I feel even more certain of my ground when I make a religious speech. If I address you upon the subject of law, I might interest the lawyers. If I discuss the science of medicine, I might interest the physicians. In like manner, merchants might be interested in comments on commerce, and farmers in matters pertaining to agriculture. But no one of these subjects appeals to all. Even the science of government, though broader than any profession or occupation, does not embrace the whole sum of life, and those who think upon it differ so among themselves that I could not speak upon the subject so as to please a part of the audience without displeasing others. While to me the science of government is intensely absorbing, I recognize that the most important things in life lie outside of the realm of government, and that more depends upon what the individual does for himself than upon what the government does or can do for him. Men can be miserable under the best government, and they can be happy under the worst government. Government affects but a part of the life which we live here, and does not deal at all with the life beyond, while religion touches the infinite circle of existence, as well as the small arc of that circle which we spend on earth. No greater theme, therefore, can engage our attention. If I discuss questions of government, I must secure the cooperation of a majority before I can put my ideas into practice. But if, in speaking on religion, I can touch one human heart for good, I have not spoken in vain, no matter how large the majority may be against me. Man is a religious being. The heart instinctively seeks for a God. Whether he worships on the banks of the Ganges, prays with his face upturned to the sun, kneels toward Mecca, or, regarding all space as a temple, communes with the Heavenly Father according to the Christian creed, man is essentially devout. There are honest doubters whose sincerity we recognize and respect, but occasionally I find young men who think it smart to be skeptical. They talk as if it were an evidence of larger intelligence to scoff at creeds and to refuse to connect themselves with churches. They call themselves liberal, as if a Christian were narrow-minded. Some go so far as to assert that the advanced thought of the world has discarded the idea that there is a God. To these young men I desire to address myself. Even some older people profess to regard religion as a superstition, pardonable in the ignorant but unworthy of the educated. Those who hold this view look down with mild contempt upon such as give to religion a definite place in their thoughts and lives. They assume an intellectual superiority and often take little pains to conceal the assumption. Tolstoy administers to the cultured crowd, the words quoted are his, a severe rebuke when he declares that the religious sentiment rests not upon a superstitious fear of the invisible forces of nature, but upon man's consciousness of his finiteness amid an infinite universe and of his sinfulness. And this consciousness, the great philosopher adds, man can never outgrow. Tolstoy is right. Man recognizes how limited are his own powers and how vast is the universe, and he leans upon the arm that is stronger than his. Man feels the weight of his sins and looks for one who is sinless. Religion has been defined by Tolstoy as the relation which man fixes between himself and his God, and morality as the outward manifestation of this inward relation. Everyone, by the time he reaches maturity, has fixed some relation between himself and God, and no material change in this relation can take place without a revolution in the man, for this relation is the most potent influence that acts upon a human life. Religion is the foundation of morality in the individual and in the group of individuals. Materialists have attempted to build up a system of morality upon the basis of enlightened self-interest. They would have man figure out by mathematics that it pays him to abstain from wrongdoing. They would even inject an element of selfishness into altruism, But the moral system elaborated by the materialists has several defects. First, its virtues are borrowed from moral systems based upon religion. All those who are intelligent enough to discuss a system of morality are so saturated with the morals derived from systems resting upon religion that they cannot frame a system resting upon reason alone. Second, as it rests upon argument rather than upon authority, the young are not in a position to accept or reject. Our laws do not permit a young man to dispose of real estate until he is 21. Why this restraint? Because his reason is not mature. And yet a young man's life is largely molded by the environment of his youth. Third, one never knows just how much of his decision is due to reason and how much is due to passion or to selfish interest. Passion can dethrone the reason. We recognize this in our criminal laws. We also recognize the bias of self-interest when we exclude from the jury every man, no matter how reasonable or upright he may be, who has a pecuniary interest in the result of the trial. And fourth, one whose morality rests upon a nice calculation of benefits to be secured spends time figuring that he should spend in action. Those who keep a book account of their good deeds seldom do enough good to justify keeping books. A noble life cannot be built upon an arithmetic. It must be rather like the spring that pours forth constantly of that which refreshes and invigorates. Morality is the power of endurance in man, and a religion which teaches personal responsibility to God gives strength to morality. There is a powerful restraining influence in the belief that an all-seeing eye scrutinizes every thought and word and act of the individual. There is wide difference between the man who is trying to conform his life to a standard of morality about him and the man who seeks to make his life approximate to a divine standard. The former attempts to live up to the standard if it is above him, and down to it if it is below him. And if he is doing right only when others are looking, he is sure to find a time when he thinks he is unobserved, and then he takes a vacation and falls. One needs the inner strength which comes with the conscious presence of a personal God. If those who are thus fortified sometimes yield to temptation, how helpless and hopeless must those be who rely upon their own strength alone. There are difficulties to be encountered in religion, but there are difficulties to be encountered everywhere. If Christians sometimes have doubts and fears, unbelievers have more doubts and greater fears. I passed through a period of skepticism when I was in college, and I have been glad ever since that I became a member of the church before I left home for college, for it helped me during those trying days. And the college days cover the dangerous period in the young man's life. He is just coming into possession of his powers and feels stronger than he ever feels afterward, and he thinks he knows more than he ever does know. It was at this period that I became confused by the different theories of creation. But I examined these theories and found that they all assumed something to begin with. You can test this for yourselves. The nebula hypothesis, for instance, assumes that matter and force existed, matter in particles infinitely fine, and each particle separated from every other particle by space infinitely great. Beginning with this assumption, force working on matter, according to this hypothesis, created a universe. Well, I have a right to assume, and I prefer to assume, a designer back of the design, a creator back of the creation. And no matter how long you draw out the process of creation, so long as God stands back of it, you cannot shake my faith in Jehovah. In Genesis it is written that, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and I can stand on that proposition until I find some theory of creation that goes farther back than the beginning. We must begin with something, we must start somewhere, and the Christian begins with God. I do not carry the doctrine of evolution as far as some do. I am not yet convinced that man is a lineal descendant of the lower animals. I do not mean to find fault with you if you want to accept the theory. All I mean to say is that while you may trace your ancestry back to the monkey, if you find pleasure or pride in doing so, you shall not connect me with your family tree without more evidence than has yet been produced. I object to the theory for several reasons. First, it is a dangerous theory. If a man links himself in generations with the monkey, it then becomes an important question whether he is going toward him or coming from him, and I have seen him going in both directions. I do not know of any argument that can be used to prove that man is an improved monkey that may not be used just as well to prove that the monkey is a degenerate man, and the latter theory is more plausible than the former. It is true that man in some physical characteristics resembles the beast, but man has a mind as well as a body, and a soul as well as a mind. The mind is greater than the body, and the soul is greater than the mind, and I object to having man's pedigree traced on 1/3 of him only, and that the lowest third. Fairbairn, in his Philosophy of Christianity, lays down a sound proposition when he says that it is not sufficient to explain man as an animal, that it is necessary to explain man in history, and the Darwinian theory does not do this. The ape, according to this theory, is older than man, and yet the ape is still an ape, while man is the author of the marvelous civilization which we see about us. One does not escape from mystery, however, by accepting this theory, for it does not explain the origin of life. When the follower of Darwin has traced the germ of life back to the lowest form in which it appears, and to follow him one must exercise more faith than religion calls for, he finds that scientists differ. Those who reject the idea of creation are divided into two schools, some believing that the first germ of life came from another planet, and others holding that it was the result of spontaneous generation. Each school answers the arguments advanced by the other, and as they cannot agree with each other, I am not compelled to agree with either. If I were compelled to accept one of these theories, I would prefer the first. For if we can chase the germ of life off this planet and get it out into space, we can guess the rest of the way and no one can contradict us. But if we accept the doctrine of spontaneous generation, we cannot explain why spontaneous generation ceased to act after the first germ was created. Go back as far as we may, we cannot escape from the creative act. And it is just as easy for me to believe that God created man as he is, as to believe that, millions of years ago, he created a germ of life and endowed it with power to develop into all that we see today. I object to the Darwinian theory until more conclusive proof is produced, because I fear we shall lose the consciousness of God's presence in our daily life if we must accept the theory that through all the ages no spiritual force has touched the life of man or shaped the destiny of nations. But there is another objection. The Darwinian theory represents man as reaching his present perfection by the operation of the law of hate, the merciless law by which the strong crowd out and kill off the weak. If this is the law of our development, then, if there is any logic that can bind the human mind, we shall turn backward toward the beast in proportion as we substitute the law of love. I prefer to believe that love, rather than hatred, is the law of development. How can hatred be the law of development when nations have advanced in proportion as they have departed from that law and adopted the law of love? But, I repeat, while I do not accept the Darwinian theory, I shall not quarrel with you about it. I only refer to it to remind you that it does not solve the mystery of life or explain human progress. I fear that some have accepted it in the hope of escaping from the miracle. But why should the miracle frighten us? And yet I am inclined to think that it is one of the test questions with the Christian. Christ cannot be separated from the miraculous. His birth, his ministrations, and his resurrection all involve the miraculous, and the change which his religion works in the human heart is a continuing miracle. Eliminate the miracles, and Christ becomes merely a human being, and his gospel is stripped of divine authority. The miracle raises two questions. Can God perform a miracle? And would he want to? The first is easy to answer. A God who can make a world can do anything he wants to do with it. The power to perform miracles is necessarily implied in the power to create. But would God want to perform a miracle? This is the question which has given most of the trouble. The more I have considered it, the less inclined I am to answer in the negative. To say that God would not perform a miracle is to assume a more intimate knowledge of God's plans and purposes than I can claim to have. I will not deny that God does perform a miracle or may perform one merely because I do not know how or why he does it. I find it so difficult to decide each day what God wants done now that I am not presumptuous enough to attempt to declare what God might have wanted to do thousands of years ago. The fact that we are constantly learning of the existence of new forces suggests the possibility that God may operate through forces yet unknown to us. And the mysteries with which we deal every day warn me that faith is as necessary as sight. Who would have credited a century ago the stories that are now told of the wonder-working electricity? For ages man had known the lightning, but only to fear it. Now this invisible current is generated by a man-made machine, imprisoned in a man-made wire and made to do the bidding of man. We're even able to dispense with the wire and hurl words through space, and the X-ray has enabled us to look through substances which were supposed until recently to exclude all light. The miracle is not more mysterious than many of the things with which man now deals. It is simply different. The miraculous birth of Christ is not more mysterious than any other conception. It is simply unlike it. Nor is the resurrection of Christ more mysterious than the myriad resurrections which mark each annual seed time. It is sometimes said that God could not suspend one of his laws without stopping the universe. But do we not suspend or overcome the law of gravitation every day? Every time we move a foot or lift a weight, we temporarily overcome one of the most universal of natural laws, and yet the world is not disturbed. Science has taught us so many things that we are tempted to conclude that we know everything. But there is really a great unknown which is still unexplored, and that which we have learned ought to increase our reverence rather than our egotism. Science has disclosed some of the machinery of the universe, but science has not yet revealed to us the great secret, the secret of life. It is to be found in every blade of grass, in every insect, in every bird, and in every animal, as well as in man. 6,000 years of recorded history, and yet we know no more about the secret of life than they knew in the beginning. We live, we plan, we have our hopes, our fears, and yet in a moment a change may come over any one of us, and this body will become a mass of lifeless clay. What is it that having we live, and having not we are as the clod? The progress of the race and the civilization which we now behold are the work of men and women who have not yet solved the mystery of their own lives. And our food, must we understand it before we eat it? If we refused to eat anything until we could understand the mystery of its growth, we would die of starvation. But mystery does not bother us in the dining room. It is only in the church that it is a stumbling block. I was eating a piece of watermelon some months ago and was struck with its beauty. I took some of the seeds and dried them and weighed them and found that it would require some 5,000 seeds to weigh a pound. And then I applied mathematics to that 40-pound melon. One of these seeds put into the ground, when warmed by the sun and moistened by the rain, takes off its coat and goes to work. It gathers from somewhere 200,000 times its own weight, and forcing this raw material through a tiny stem, constructs a watermelon. It ornaments the outside with a covering of green. Inside the green it puts a layer of white, and within the white a core of red, and all through the red it scatters seeds, each one capable of continuing the work of reproduction. Where does that little seed get its tremendous power? Where does it find its coloring matter? How does it collect its flavoring extract? How does it build a watermelon? Until you can explain a watermelon, do not be too sure that you can set limits to the power of the Almighty and say just what He would do or how He would do it. I cannot explain the watermelon, but I eat it and enjoy it. The egg is the most universal of foods, and its use dates from the beginning. But what is more mysterious than an egg? When an egg is fresh, it is an important article of merchandise. A hen can destroy its market value in a week's time, but in 2 weeks more she can bring forth from it what man could not find in it. We eat eggs, but we cannot explain an egg. Water has been used from the birth of man. We learned, after it has been used for ages, that it is merely a mixture of gases. But it is far more important that we have water to drink than that we know that it is not water. Everything that grows tells a like story of infinite power. Why should I deny that a divine hand fed a multitude with a few loaves and fishes when I see hundreds of millions fed every year by a hand which converts the seeds scattered over the field into an abundant harvest? We know that food can be multiplied in a few months' time. Shall we deny the power of the Creator to eliminate the element of time when we have gone so far in eliminating the element of space? Who am I that I should attempt to measure the arm of the Almighty with my puny arm, or to measure the brain of the Infinite with my finite mind? Who am I that I should attempt to put metes and bounds to the power of the Creator? But there is something even more wonderful still. The mysterious change that takes place in the human heart when the man begins to hate the things he loved and to love the things he hated. The marvelous transformation that takes place in the man who, before the change, would have sacrificed a world for his own advancement, but who, after the change, would give his life for a principle and esteem it a privilege to make sacrifice for his convictions. What greater miracle than this that converts a selfish, self-centered human being into a center from which good influences flow out in every direction? And yet this miracle has been wrought in the heart of each one of us, or may be wrought, and we have seen it wrought in the hearts and lives of those about us. No, living a life that is a mystery and living in the midst of mystery and miracles, I shall not allow either to deprive me of the benefits of the Christian religion. If you ask me if I understand everything in the Bible, I answer no. But if we will try to live up to what we do understand, we will be kept so busy doing good that we will not have time to worry about the passages which we do not understand. Some of those who question the miracle also question the theory of atonement. They assert that it does not accord with their idea of justice for one to die for all. Let each one bear his own sins and the punishment due for them, they say. The doctrine of vicarious suffering is not a new one. It is as old as the race. That one should suffer for others is one of the most familiar of principles, and we see the principle illustrated every day of our lives. Take the family, for instance. From the day the mother's first child is born, for 20 or 30 years, her children are scarcely out of her waking thoughts. Her life trembles in the balance at each child's birth. She sacrifices for them. She surrenders herself to them. Is it because she expects them to pay her back? Fortunate for the parent and fortunate for the child if the latter has an opportunity to repay in part the debt it owes. But no child can compensate a parent for a parent's care. In the course of nature the debt is paid, not to the parent, but to the next generation, and the next, each generation suffering, sacrificing for, and surrendering itself to the generation that follows. This is the law of our lives. Nor is this confined to the family. Every step in civilization has been made possible by those who have been willing to sacrifice for posterity. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of conscience, and free government have all been won for the world by those who were willing to labor unselfishly for their fellows. So well established is this doctrine that we do not regard anyone as great unless he recognizes how important his life is in comparison with the problems with which he deals. I find proof that man was made in the image of his Creator in the fact that, throughout the centuries, man has been willing to die, if necessary, that blessings denied to him might be enjoyed by his children, his children's children, and the world. The seeming paradox, he that saveth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it, has an application wider than that usually given to it. It is an epitome of history. Those who live only for themselves live little lives, but those who stand ready to give themselves for the advancement of things greater than themselves find a larger life than the one they would have surrendered. Wendell Phillips gave expression to the same idea when he said, "What imprudent men the benefactors of the race have been! How prudently most men sink into nameless graves, while now and then a few forget themselves into immortality." We win immortality not by remembering ourselves, but by forgetting ourselves in devotion to things larger than ourselves. Instead of being an unnatural plan, the plan of salvation is in perfect harmony with human nature as we understand it. Sacrifice is the language of love, and Christ, in suffering for the world, adopted the only means of reaching the heart. This can be demonstrated not only by theory but by experience, for the story of his life, his teachings, his sufferings, and his death has been translated into every language, and everywhere it has touched the heart. But if I were going to present an argument in favor of the divinity of Christ, I would not begin with miracles or mystery or with the theory of atonement. I would begin as Carnegie Simpson does in his book entitled The Fact of Christ. Commencing with the undisputed fact that Christ lived, he points out that one cannot contemplate this fact without feeling that in some way it is related to those now living. He says that one can read of Alexander, of Caesar, or of Napoleon and not feel that it is a matter of personal concern, but that when one reads that Christ lived and how he died, he feels that somehow there is a cord that stretches from that life to his. As he studies the character of Christ, he becomes conscious of certain virtues which stand out in bold relief. His purity, his forgiving spirit, and his unfathomable love. The author is correct. Christ presents an example of purity in thought and life, and man, conscious of his own imperfections and grieved over his shortcomings, finds inspiration in the fact that he was tempted in all points like as we are, and yet without sin. I am not sure but that each can find just here a way of determining for himself whether he possesses the true spirit of a Christian. If the sinlessness of Christ inspires within him an earnest desire to conform his life more nearly to the perfect example, he is indeed a follower. If, on the other hand, he resents the reproof which the purity of Christ offers and refuses to mend his ways, he has yet to be born again. The most difficult of all the virtues to cultivate is the forgiving spirit. Revenge seems to be natural with man. It is human to want to get even with an enemy. It has even been popular to boast of vindictiveness. It was once inscribed on a man's monument that he had repaid both friends and enemies more than he had received. This was not the spirit of Christ. He taught forgiveness, and in that incomparable prayer which he left as model for our petitions, he made our willingness to forgive the measure by which we may claim forgiveness. He not only taught forgiveness, but he exemplified his teachings in his life. When those who persecuted him brought him to the most disgraceful of all deaths, his spirit of forgiveness rose above his sufferings, and he prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." But love is the foundation of Christ's creed. The world had known love before. Parents had loved their children, and children their parents. Husbands had loved their wives, and wives their husbands, and friend had loved friend. But Jesus gave a new definition of love. His love was as wide as the sea. Its limits were so far flung that even an enemy could not travel beyond its bounds. Other teachers sought to regulate the lives of their followers by rule and formula, but Christ's plan was to purify the heart and then to leave love to direct the footsteps. What conclusion is to be drawn from the life, the teachings, and the death of this historic figure? Reared in a carpenter's shop, with no knowledge of literature save Bible literature, with no acquaintance with philosophers living or with the writings of sages dead, when only about 30 years old, he gathered disciples about him, promulgated a higher code of morals than the world had ever known before, and proclaimed himself the Messiah. He taught and performed miracles for a few brief months, and then was crucified. His disciples were scattered and many of them put to death. His claims were disputed, his resurrection denied, and his followers persecuted. And yet, from this beginning, his religion spread until hundreds of millions have taken his name with reverence upon their lips, and millions have been willing to die rather than surrender the faith which he put within their hearts. How shall we account for him? Here is the greatest fact of history. Here is one who has with increasing power for 1900 years molded the hearts, the thoughts, and the lives of men, and he exerts more influence today than ever before. What think ye of Christ? It is easier to believe him divine than to explain in any other way what he said and did and was. And I have greater faith even than before, since I visited the Orient and witnessed the successful contest which Christianity is waging against the religions and philosophies of the East. I was thinking a few years ago of the Christmas which was then approaching, and of him in whose honor the day is celebrated. I recalled the message, "Peace on earth, good will to men." And then my thoughts ran back to the prophecy uttered centuries before his birth, in which he was described as the Prince of Peace. To reinforce my memory, I reread the prophecy, and I found immediately following a verse which I had forgotten, a verse which declares that of the increase of his peace and government there shall be no end. And Isaiah adds that he shall judge his people with justice and with judgment. I had been reading of the rise and fall of nations, and occasionally I had met a gloomy philosopher who preached the doctrine that nations, like individuals, must of necessity have their birth, their infancy, their maturity, and finally their decay and death. But here I read of a government that is to be perpetual, a government of increasing peace and blessedness, the government of the Prince of Peace, and it is to rest on justice. I have thought of this prophecy many times during the last few years, and I have selected this theme that I might present some of the reasons which lead me to believe that Christ has fully earned the right to be called the Prince of Peace, a title that will in the years to come be more and more applied to him. If he can bring peace to each individual heart, and if his creed, when applied, will bring peace throughout the earth, who will deny his right to be called the Prince of Peace? All the world is in search of peace. Every heart that ever beat has sought for peace, and many have been the methods employed to secure it. Some have thought to purchase it with riches, and have labored to secure wealth, hoping to find peace when they were able to go where they pleased and buy what they liked. Of those who have endeavored to purchase peace with money, the large majority have failed to secure the money. But what has been the experience of those who have been eminently successful in finance? They all tell the same story, namely, that they spent the first half of their lives trying to get money from others, and the last half trying to keep others from getting their money, and that they found peace in neither half. Some have even reached the point where they find difficulty in getting people to accept their money. And I know of no better indication of the ethical awakening in this country than the increasing tendency to scrutinize the methods of money making. I am sanguine enough to believe that the time will yet come when respectability will no longer be sold to great criminals by helping them to spend their ill-gotten gains. A long step in advance will have been taken when religious, educational, and charitable institutions refuse to condone conscienceless methods in business and leave the possessor of illegitimate accumulations to learn how lonely life is when one prefers money to morals. Some have sought peace in social distinction. But whether they have been within the charmed circle and fearful lest they might fall out, or outside and hopeful that they might get in, they have not found peace. Some have thought, vain thought, to find peace in political prominence. But whether office comes by birth, as in monarchies, or by election, as in republics, it does not bring peace. An office is not considered a high one if all can occupy it. Only when few in a generation can hope to enjoy an honor do we call it a great honor. I am glad that our Heavenly Father did not make the peace of the human heart to depend upon our ability to buy it with money, secure it in society, or win it at the polls, for in either case but few could have obtained it. But when he made peace the reward of a conscience void of offense toward God and man, he put it within the reach of all. The poor can secure it as easily as the rich, the social outcast as freely as the leader of society, and the humblest citizen equally with those who wield political power. To those who have grown gray in the church, I need not speak of the peace to be found in faith in God and trust in an overruling providence. Christ taught that our lives are precious in the sight of God, and poets have taken up the thought and woven it into immortal verse. No uninspired writer has expressed it more beautifully than William Cullen Bryant in his Ode to a Waterfowl. After following the wanderings of the bird of passage as it seeks first its southern and then its northern home, he concludes, "Thou art gone, the abyss of heaven hath swallowed up thy form, but on my heart deeply hath sunk the lesson thou hast given, and shall not soon depart. He who, from zone to zone, guides through the boundless sky thy certain flight, in the long way that I must tread alone, will lead my steps aright." Christ promoted peace by giving us assurance that a line of communication can be established between the Father above and the child below. And who will measure the consolations of the hour of prayer? An immortality. Who will estimate the peace which a belief in the future life has brought to the sorrowing hearts of the sons of men? You may talk to the young about death ending all, for life is full and hope is strong, but preach not this doctrine to the mother who stands by the deathbed of her babe, or to one who is within the shadow of a great affliction. When I was a young man, I wrote to Colonel Ingersoll and asked him for his views on God and immortality. His secretary answered that the great infidel was not at home, but enclosed a copy of a speech of Colonel Ingersoll's which covered my question. I scanned it with eagerness and found that he had expressed himself about as follows: "I do not say that there is no God. I simply say I do not know." I do not say that there is no life beyond the grave. I simply say I do not know. And from that day to this I have asked myself the question and have been unable to answer it to my own satisfaction. How could anyone find pleasure in taking from a human heart a living faith and substituting therefor the cold and cheerless doctrine, I do not know? Christ gave us proof of immortality, and it was a welcome assurance, although it would hardly seem necessary that one should rise from the dead to convince us that the grave is not the end. To every created thing God has given a tongue that proclaims a future life. If the Father deigns to touch with divine power the cold and pulseless heart of the buried acorn and to make it burst forth from its prison walls, will he leave neglected in the earth the soul of man made in the image of his Creator? If he stoops to give to the rosebush, whose withered blossoms float upon the autumn breeze, the sweet assurance of another springtime, will he refuse the words of hope to the sons of men when the frosts of winter come? If matter, mute and inanimate, though changed by the forces of nature into a multitude of forms, can never die, will the imperial spirit of man suffer annihilation when it has paid a brief visit, like a royal guest, to this tenement of clay? No, I am sure that he who, notwithstanding his apparent prodigality, created nothing without a purpose and wasted not a single atom in all his creation, has made provision for a future life in which man's universal longing for immortality will find its realization. I am as sure that we live again as I am sure that we live today. In Cairo I secured a few grains of wheat that had slumbered for more than 30 centuries in an Egyptian tomb. As I looked at them, this thought came into my mind. If one of those grains had been planted on the banks of the Nile the year after it grew, and all its lineal descendants had been planted and replanted from that time until now, its progeny would today be sufficiently numerous to feed the teeming millions of the world. An unbroken chain of life connects the earliest grains of wheat with the grains that we sow and reap. There is in the grains of wheat an invisible something which has power to discard the body that we see, and from earth and air fashion a new body, so much like the old one that we cannot tell the one from the other. If this invisible germ of life in the grain of wheat can thus pass unimpaired through 3,000 resurrections, I shall not doubt that my soul has power to clothe itself with a body suited to its new existence when this earthly frame has crumbled into dust. A belief in immortality not only consoles the individual, but it exerts a powerful influence in bringing peace between individuals. If one actually thinks that man dies as the brute dies, he will yield more easily to the temptation to do injustice to his neighbor when the circumstances are such as to promise security from detection. But if one really expects to meet again and live eternally with those whom he knows today, he is restrained from evil deeds by the fear of endless remorse. We do not know what rewards are in store for us or what punishments may be reserved, but if there were no other, it would be some punishment for one who deliberately and consciously wrongs another. To have to live forever in the company of the person wronged and have his littleness and selfishness laid bare. I repeat, a belief in immortality must exert a powerful influence in establishing justice between men and thus laying the foundation for peace. Again, Christ deserved to be called the Prince of Peace because he has given us a message of greatness which promotes peace. When his disciples quarreled among themselves as to which should be greatest in the kingdom of heaven, he rebuked them and said, "Let him who would be chiefest among you be the servant of all." Service is the measure of greatness. It always has been true. It is true today, and it always will be true, that he is greatest who does the most of good. And how this old world will be transformed when this standard of greatness becomes the standard of every life. Nearly all of our controversies and combats grow out of the fact that we're trying to get something from each other. There will be peace when our aim is to do something for each other. Our enmities and animosities arise largely from our efforts to get as much as possible out of the world. There will be peace when our endeavor is to put as much as possible into the world. The human measure of a human life is its income. The divine measure of a life is its outgo, its overflow, its contribution to the welfare of all. Christ also led the way to peace by giving us a formula for the propagation of truth. Not all of those who have really desired to do good have employed the Christian method, not all Christians even. In the history of the human race, but two methods have been used. The first is the forcible method, and it has been employed most frequently. A man has an idea which he thinks is good. He tells his neighbors about it, and they do not like it. This makes him angry. He thinks it would be so much better for them if they would like it, and, seizing a club, he attempts to make them like it. But one trouble about this rule is that it works both ways. When a man starts out to compel his neighbors to think as he does, he generally finds them willing to accept the challenge, and they spend so much time in trying to coerce each other that they have no time left to do each other good. The other is the Bible plan. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. And there is no other way of overcoming evil. I am not much of a farmer. I get more credit for my farming than I deserve, and my little farm receives more advertising than it is entitled to. But I am farmer enough to know that if I cut down weeds they will spring up again, and farmer enough to know that if I plant something there which has more vitality than the weeds, I shall not only get rid of the constant cutting, but have the benefit of the crop besides. In order that there might be no mistake in his plan of propagating the truth, Christ went into detail and laid emphasis upon the value of example. So live that others, seeing your good works, may be constrained to glorify your Father which is in heaven. There is no human influence so potent for good as that which goes out from an upright life. A sermon may be answered, the arguments presented and the speech may be disputed, but no one can answer a Christian life. It is the unanswerable argument in favor of our religion. It may be a slow process, this conversion of the world by the silent influence of a noble example, but it is the only sure one, and the doctrine applies to nations as well as to individuals. The gospel of the Prince of Peace gives us the only hope that the world has, and it is an increasing hope, of the substitution of reason for the arbitrament of force in the settlement of international disputes. And our nation ought not to wait for other nations. It ought to take the lead and prove its faith in the omnipotence of truth. But Christ has given us a platform so fundamental that it can be applied successfully to all controversies. We're interested in platforms. We attend conventions, sometimes traveling long distances. We have wordy wars over the phraseology of various planks, and then we wage earnest campaigns to secure the endorsement of these platforms at the polls. The platform given to the world by the Prince of Peace is more far-reaching and more comprehensive than any platform ever written by the convention of any party in any country. When he condensed into one commandment those of the 10 which relate to man's duty toward his fellows, and enjoined upon us the rule, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself," he presented a plan for the solution of all the problems that now vex society or may hereafter arise. Other remedies may palliate or postpone the day of settlement, but this is all sufficient, and the reconciliation which it effects is a permanent one. My faith in the future, and I have faith, and my optimism, for I am an optimist, my faith and my optimism rest upon the belief that Christ's teachings are being more studied today than ever before, and that with this larger study will come a larger application of those teachings to the everyday life of the world and to the questions with which we deal. In former times, when men read that Christ came to bring life and immortality to light, they placed the emphasis upon immortality. Now they are studying Christ's relation to human life. People used to read the Bible to find out what it said of heaven. Now they read it more to find out what light it throws upon the pathway of today. In former years, many thought to prepare themselves for future bliss by a life of seclusion here. We are learning that to follow in the footsteps of the Master, we must go about doing good. Christ declared that he came that we might have life and have it more abundantly. The world is learning that Christ came not to narrow life, but to enlarge it, not to rob it of its joy, but to fill it to overflowing with purpose, earnestness, and happiness. But this Prince of Peace promises not only peace, but strength. Some have thought his teachings fit only for the weak and the timid, and unsuited to men of vigor, energy, and ambition. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Only the man of faith can be courageous. Confident that he fights on the side of Jehovah, he doubts not the success of his cause. What matters it whether he shares in the shouts of triumph? If every word spoken in behalf of truth has its influence, and every deed done for the right weighs in the final account, it is immaterial to the Christian whether his eyes behold victory or whether he dies in the midst of the conflict. Yea, though thou lie upon the dust, when they who helped thee flee in fear die full of hope and manly trust, like those who fell in battle here. Another hand thy sword shall wield, another hand the standard wave, till from the trumpet's mouth is pealed the blast of triumph o'er thy grave. Only those who believe attempt the seemingly impossible, and by attempting prove that one with God can chase 1,000, and that two can put 10,000 to flight. I can imagine that the early Christians who were carried into the Colosseum to make a spectacle for those more savage than the beasts were entreated by their doubting companions not to endanger their lives. But, kneeling in the center of the arena, they prayed and sang until they were devoured. How helpless they seemed, and measured by every human rule, how hopeless was their cause. And yet, within a few decades, the power which they invoked proved mightier than the legions of the emperor, and the faith in which they died was triumphant o'er all the land. It is said that those who went to mock at their sufferings returned asking themselves, "What is it that can enter into the heart of man and make him die as these die?" They were greater conquerors in their death than they could have been had they purchased life by a surrender of their faith. What would have been the fate of the church if the early Christians had had as little faith as many of our Christians of today? And if the Christians of today had the faith of the martyrs, how long would it be before the fulfillment of the prophecy that every knee shall bow and every tongue confess? I am glad that he who is called the Prince of Peace, who can bring peace to every troubled heart, and whose teachings exemplified in life will bring peace between man and man, between community and community, between state and state, between nation and nation throughout the world. I am glad that he brings courage as well as peace, so that those who follow him may take up and each day bravely do the duties that to that day fall. As the Christian grows older, he appreciates more and more the completeness with which Christ satisfies the longings of the heart, and, grateful for the peace which he enjoys and the strength which he has received, he repeats the words of the great scholar Sir William Jones: "Before thy mystic altar, heavenly truth, I kneel in manhood as I knelt in youth. Thus let me kneel till this dull form decay, and life's last shade be brightened by thy ray." End of section 45. Recording by Paul Adams. www.yawnguy.com